Good morning. My name is Greg Sizemore. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Construction Users Roundtable, and we welcome you to this 10th webinar in a series entitled Construction in Crisis, a Curt Response, or perhaps more appropriately, an owner response. The purpose of these webinars is to make you a better, more well-informed, well-connected decision maker as you deal with this pandemic and its impact on capital projects. Curt has always said we only have three things we offer our members. Number one is the perspectives of each of us. Number two, the collective experiences of each of us. And number three, the resources that we create together or that we bring to the table from a number of sources. And this is one of those resources. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the National Center for Construction Education and Research, whose generous contribution makes these webinars free and makes them possible. I'd also like to take a moment and thank you, the Curt member. I want you to know that the Curt office has been open ever since this thing broke out. We were not closed one day. We're open 9 to 5 every day, and oftentimes well into the evening. So if you think there is something that your association can help you with, please do not hesitate to call Rob Fisher or Ronna DeBro. Their contact information is on the website and in the materials that will go out even subsequent to this event. So thank you for your Curt membership. I want you to take a moment and also make sure that your microphone is muted and your camera is disabled. You'll notice if you put the cursor over your screen that a chat box will be prominently displayed at the very center of your screen. That's where we're going to do Q&A. And I encourage you to stay to the very end. It's been my experience that the Q&A session is oftentimes some of the richest information sharing. So please stay with us to the end, and we will be just about on time at 12 noon. I want to also point your attention to the fact that the next series of webinars is going to be in May, virtual webinars. You can learn more about those Wednesday, May the 6th. You can learn more about those by accessing curt.org/events, and you'll find more information about our Safety Summit and about our Lean Summit. I'd like to get started now. The presentation for today is the Rising Phoenix, or Phoenix Rising, and how we can begin to prepare for a prosperous, effective construction industry future. We're joined today by three members of the Premier Resources Group, or the PRG team. You can access their information at theprgteam.com. But Scott Cameron, Bob Dresser, and Pete DeMont are our featured speakers. Scott has been with P&G for a number of years, Bob Dresser with AMEC and with the Floor Corporation, and Pete has had many, many years of experience with both Tyco and Pentair. You know, the PRG group is unique in that it provides both staffing and advisory services to both the commercial and the industrial construction industries. So that unique perspective, coupled with the experience of the members of the PRG team, bring a more holistic approach to your project. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Scott Cameron.
Online. So starting with leadership, it's we don't have time to teach leaderships. There's books, there's manuals, there's webinars, there's TED Talks on leadership. But why are we going to talk it now? Because it's one of the things that you need to look at. And what we're going to do is kind of like share 5 components or behaviors of a leadership model. And what I'd like you to do is rate yourself from a standpoint of 1 to 5. 5 being, I'm really a great leader, and 1 being like, well, it's probably really a need that I need to grow in, because that will help you as you prepare to lead in the crisis. And then I'll just close with briefly going through my top 3 leadership beliefs. So as we look at, leadership in a project world, it's like, what's the simple definition? Safely make it happen. Pretty easy. What's that mean? Right scope, right cost, on schedule. Some people equate that to the 3-legged stool. In other words, you have to have all 3 legs the same to have a great project. So as you look at the leadership model, it's like, wow, 5 components. Why 5? Well, we're going to talk about each one of the 5 because I think it talks to the true, value of leadership. As we look at, execute, envisions, engages, enables, and energizes. So starting off with executing, I think this is the point that people that run projects or are involved in them all the time, they're just comfortable with it. You develop plans to execute, you ensure the team's aligned, you establish clear expectations, management established clear expectations, and you pretty much say, what's my accountability to self and others? A comfort area, and a lot of people stop with that one item. But there are 4 others that we need to deal with. First, the next one is kind of like envisioning. So, how am I going to communicate to the future, to myself, to my team, to others, within my company and outside? What are the opportunities that we have now in this crisis to come back stronger and better than before? And then what's my vision and how am I going to share it with others? So as you look at engaging behaviors, it's more from a standpoint of getting out of your box. So I need to reach out to others. I need to leverage my collaboration like I've never done before, both inside and outside my company. So why is it important? An easy slide here. It's important from the standpoint of you're going to get your team together, they're going to take a look at the box, and they're going to say, well, how do I move this box forward? If you go to box 2, it's like, well, let's all pull in a different direction. Always a success model for people of pulling in the wrong direction because you never get to where you want to go in the time you don't. So the engagement model says, how are you going to kind of like get everybody to pull in the same direction to deliver success for the future? Energizing. Probably the hardest one for me is how do I motivate people? It's, how do I create an upbeat environment? What's easier for me is I can role model energizing desired behavior by working a lot, reaching out to people, communicating to people, but it's creating that upbeat environment. And how do we motivate people to join you in the journey to get back online as fast as possible? Enabling behaviors. So how do I enable people to be the best they can be? How do I reduce the barriers? One of the things in a crisis is like identifying the barriers, and that could be like, oh, this is always how we did it. I guess we're going to have to do it the same. It's like, maybe not, because the goal now is to get back in the business as fast as possible. Maybe those barriers are far more negotiable in today's line than they have been in the past. Again, it's what's the goal, what's the vision? If there's a barrier, can I eliminate the barrier? And then how do I get my peak performance? Do I sit in boring meetings all day? Or do I basically say, let's make my meetings more efficient so I can enable people to use their time better? So that's it, the 5. We kind of went through them fast. As I indicated behind, take a step back, look at it from a standpoint of rating yourself from 1, I don't do that very well, to 5. And then say, with the task ahead of me, what do I need to be doing? How do I need to be driving myself or reaching outside the box to get better results in the future and help lead? So if you look at my top 3 leadership beliefs, they're pretty easy. Exploit the strengths of you and your people. So it's about people, people, people. People will lead you to the next step of the future. And you have to help them, empower them, and deliver them future. The second point is communicate, communicate, communicate. Now, communication can be verbal, it can be email, it can be text. There are so many venues today. But the other part of communication that's vital is listening. What are my people saying? What are the issues? How can I better empower them? So communication is pretty much what's my communication plan to help lead this effort as we move forward. And lastly, it's how do you stretch your limits? It's like the future will not be the same as it used to be. That's pretty much what everybody says when you listen to the news. And it's like, so how do we get ourselves in a better position to deliver greater and better results? It's like go back to the old way may not be the best. I think people are using the electronic versions more and more. Just look at the Zoom meeting we're having today as far as how to better position themselves for the future, what needs to change. So as we do that, that's pretty much leadership is you. How are you going to do it? What are the areas that you need to improve to help lead to your company, your organization, and yourself to the future? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and he'll take you through, how to come back. Bob?
Thanks a lot, Scott. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending, and a big thank you to Greg and the CURT organization to extend this opportunity for us to share. The COVID situation is unprecedented and has created interesting project issues. Some of you may be experiencing paused projects, and some may be carrying on within your changed world with new protocol and processes. With that, this is a great time to unite your project stakeholders and seize this time as opportunity to plan, to reactivate and perform your projects with superior execution. We need to respect that all of our projects have unique conditions which create unique hazards. Some projects are in different phases of construction and are building different operating processes. Leverage the plans that you have and update these plans for your restart, blocking and tackling as such. These plans include project and construction execution plans, safety plans and practices, construction quality plans, schedules, and cost estimates, and more. We are all concerned with the financial ramifications of our closed projects. There are various ways to mitigate your risks as well as optimize your project's financial results. As discussed in previous CURT webinars, your project will benefit from collaborating with key project stakeholders, including the owner, engineer or architect, suppliers, and contractors. We encourage projects to move to an integrated project delivery model whereby we instill one team, one set of project goals with one team of functional resources. An IPD approach will reduce transactional and overall project costs and schedule while optimizing resources. With that, ensure to proactively consult your legal and financial personnel for any contractual shift you are contemplating. Documenting site conditions at closure as well as at reactivation is critical. Utilize photographs, drones, checklists, reports, etc. This documentation will help with any potential future legal matters, but more so proactively assist with scope development, planning, and estimating for your reactivation activities. Collaboratively inspect, plan, estimate, and schedule your reactivation. Include all of your functional managers, including human resources, procurement, project controls, construction, engineering, and all of their functional disciplines with this effort. Teamwork and innovation will create superior results going forward. Crisis situations create change for all entities involved with your projects. This includes evaluation of your change management processes and levels of authorization. A rebaseline estimate will be required as a great deal has changed, including new labor forces, site conditions, safety protocols, supply chain situations, seasonable schedule changes, work shifts, and additional scope due to being idle. Ensure all additional or changed scope is documented in work orders, and those are reconciled with the rebaseline estimate and schedule. Be transparent with your findings and approaches, including the quantification of the impacts of your delays. Collaborate transparently to make change management a positive process as your project moves forward. Perform material takeoffs in order to build your backlog of materials which will support worker productivity. Do not hoard supplies which your community needs. Ensure your material flows are secure and you have backup plans while working with your suppliers. Reassess and communicate your rejuvenated logistics plan and review off-site fabrication and assembly opportunities and their cost and schedule benefits. Like your budget, rebaseline your schedule. Incorporate new and revised milestones and timelines while being realistic. Add site inspection, repair, and readiness activities to your schedule. While resource loading, remember there's 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Assess the ways to use this time to maximize labor attraction, utilization, and productivity. This includes optimizing your shift schedules. Enhance this time to reassess and complete constructability and safety and design. Develop a healthy backlog, say 2 to 3 months, depending on your project, of construction installation work packages, including identifying engineering and procurement deliverables not completed to date. Resource load with a construction area approach. Account for workforce distancing and worker density factors, and include those into your productivity factors and your schedule and cost estimates. Ensure to obtain schedule input from all stakeholders, including your suppliers and subcontractors. As in current healthcare approaches, our potential is maximized by having all vested parties work together. No one entity created this situation. We're better together to rise out of it successfully. Engage and leverage subject matter experts, no matter whose house or entity they are employed by. This approach reinforces the IPD program model we discussed earlier. Create and communicate with excitement your new vision and goals throughout the project to ensure everyone is aware of the new and improved project plans and goals. Leverage those subject matter experts early and now for assessing, planning, estimating, and scheduling reactivation activities, including frontline supervision. Also, craft labor will be heavily recruited, thus an aggressive recruiting effort is anticipated as many will be vying for the same resources. Consider offering attractive shift schedules and review your benefit and compensation packages. Communicate with your top performers during these idle times with a culture of caring. Develop onboarding plans which are current with all health and safety protocols, as your employees will need to gain confidence. Be mindful and assess your workers' state of mind and health. This includes craft and staff. Regularly consult CDC, OSHA, CURT membership, and peer projects for current best practices. Institute and communicate a program to get everyone focused on safety. Critique your frontline supervision ratios as you may benefit from more. Ensure ample health and safety equipment such as masks, harnesses, lanyards, etc. are in hand and readily obtainable. Ensure health and medical care plans, including your worker health testing and daily site access. Inspect owner assets for leaks and overall integrity. Ensure your checklists are comprehensive by utilizing your project equipment lists. Inspect the entire site, including parking lots, walkways, laydowns, etc. Inspect all construction equipment, including earthwork equipment, cranes, tuggers, generators, and so on. Inspect your tools and consumables. For example, has your welding rod been stored per code? Ensure studs, bolts, and gaskets are free of rust and conduct preventive maintenance on all equipment to ensure leaks do not occur upon startup. Weather creates ruts, washouts, soil erosion, and deteriorated earth stabilization. Be sure to place barriers and fix these situations immediately. Other items such as debris, damaged signage, and temporary facilities, including on-site foreman's shacks need to be inspected and repaired. Also, if your project is on an operating site, ensure to align with the operations to ensure that safety and health processes and procedures are consistent and current, including communication protocols. Approach all energy as live and active. Assume things are different and stress caution. Inspect all electrical components such as temporary power, including your cables and panels. Inspect work which has been completed and signed off that has a good sound integrity to it. Ensure that fluid levels and transformers and like equipment are per manufacturer's recommendations. Check that overhead power lines are secure and ensure that per pooling of water, your energy sources is cleared properly. Inspect, rotate, lubricate mechanical equipment while consulting your manufacturer's recommendations. Inspect buildings for damage and molds while conforming with occupancy requirements. Building openings and potential vandalism are risks that need to be addressed. For piping systems, clear debris, rust, check valve integrity. Instrumentation and control should be recalibrated and conductivities checked. Construction equipment needs to be safe, including scaffold where that needs to be re-inspected, secured, and re-tagged for safe use. Inspect tarps and other temporary weather protection for integrity. Rigging equipment, including cranes and lifting devices such as cables, slings, and chokers, all need to be inspected. Ensure tie-off safety systems are secure and of high integrity. In closing, your project will benefit from leadership's emphasis on taking this time to plan and ready yourselves for a great project completion. With that, I'd like to introduce Pete Dumont.
All right, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. Wow, what an interesting time it is. While we're certainly in the middle of a global crisis, a friend of mine I was chatting with yesterday says, how many more black swans are we going to be facing here as oil dropped and closed at minus $37 a barrel yesterday? Quite an interesting time indeed. And, while we're certainly in the middle of a global crisis right now, I actually believe the construction industry was already facing a crisis well before COVID-19 and negative $37 a barrel oil. Although I think it's recovered a little bit this morning, it's still in negative territory. But, beyond the sobering performance metrics published here by the Construction Industry Institute, many of you may be familiar with CII. They're a large research institute based in Austin. But there's some data on here from Bechtel and some others. Owners are facing a crisis in terms of spiraling cost escalation on projects already, while at the same time, contractors' margins have been getting squeezed. I'll regularly talk to owners and they'll tell me their projects cost too much. And then I'll go talk to contractors and they'll say they're not making any money. Well, sadly, they're both right. According to CII, 95%, as you can see on this chart, 95% of projects fail to meet one or more of their business objectives. And the problem's even worse when you talk about mega projects over $1 billion. And, it's interesting to see the CEO of one of our industry's blue chip contractor companies say that he thinks our industry's business model is broken. Well, I wholeheartedly agree with him. I'd like to draw your attention to the metric on the far right. On the average non-residential project, approximately 40% of the total installed cost is wasted on transactions. Where's all that money going? Well, think about that, and I'm going to come back to it here in a few minutes. The formula for happiness in our industry isn't all that difficult to understand, and I think owners and contractors generally understand what the other one wants in the execution of a contract and a project. First of all, for owners, I think the things they care about most are shown here. Return on investment being at the top of the list. We often talk about predictability of project cost and schedule, but what owners really want, especially the C-suite leadership that sanctions those projects, is predictability of their return on capital employed. Of course, owners must own certain decisions such as what to build, where to build it, how much capacity to produce, and so on. And then, many expect the contractors to own the project execution side of things, namely this is cost, schedule, quality, and safety. However, owners play a key role in managing the success of the project and cannot delegate 100% of the project risk and performance outcomes to the contractor. And as owners have been downsized in recent years, and as new non-traditional owners pop up, especially if you look in the LNG space, this is becoming more of a challenge. Owners also want capital efficiency. In other words, getting more construction for the money. You can have predictability of project cost, and we talk about that a lot, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to capital efficiency. If we thought capital dollars were tight before the crisis, and they were, budgets are going to be even tighter going forward. This means our industry needs to drive out waste, find smarter ways to collaborate and deliver projects faster and cheaper, way beyond what we've even done to date. This brings us to sustainability and social responsibility. Owners more than ever care about their carbon footprint, their effects on the environment, and the sustainability of their operations. This means a lot of things, but most importantly, it means having a safe, healthy, and trained workforce. I imagine we'll see a number of new policies and programs relating to worker health emerge as a result of this crisis, and with some of the site hygiene and fever detection types of programs that are underway already, we see that already happening. So now let's shift over to the right and talk about contractors. And when I use the term contractor here, I'm really talking about everybody within the supply chain underneath the owner. So that's engineers and material suppliers and so on. Every contractor, first of all, needs and wants to make a fair and reasonable profit. So let's put that on the table. To have a healthy industry, every member of the supply chain needs to be profitable. If contractors lose money on projects, and we've seen some high-profile examples of that in the news lately, it only drives up costs for owners long-term. These losses, along with the debt financing for mergers and acquisitions of struggling companies, sits within the cost structure of the supply chain and is a major form of financial waste. Along these lines, contractors should not be forced to take on more risk than they can cost-effectively handle. Especially recently, we've seen an unhealthy level of risk shifting, in my opinion, with contractors taking on too much risk. Numerous bankruptcies have been in the news lately. You're probably familiar with Carillion in the UK, Natelco in Washington, D.C., McDermott, CB&I, there's a number of them. My guess is we'll see more of this fallout as the economic crisis continues and perhaps even worsens, but let's hope not. We should realize that as risk gets pushed farther down the supply chain, it gets priced more expensively at lower levels, and that cost burden is pushed right back up to the owner, but now with multiple layers of markups. It's a much smarter strategy for the owner to allocate risk fairly throughout the supply chain up front and do it in the most cost-effective way possible. And then I guess I would also say contractors also want, and I believe deserve, to get paid timely. According to CII, the average day sales outstanding, or DSO, in non-residential construction is 74 days. This is an unacceptably long period of time. This is essentially the largest source of capital waste for owners, whether they realize it or not. The reason for this is that, quite honestly, contractors aren't banks. Contractors are in the business to build, not lend. For most contractors, their cost of capital is quite high, often well over 10%. Conversely, large owners typically have the asset base and size to borrow at much lower rates. The cost of capital that sits in the supply chain actually accumulates at over 2% per month, or an equivalent of about 26% annual interest. My guess is owners can borrow money cheaper than that, so why do they burden the supply chain with that cost of capital? Sadly, the current cash flow situation for contractors may only worsen during the crisis. Lending for contractors likely will tighten in the future due to commercial lending stress throughout the banking industry coming out of the crisis, which is going to make it even harder for contractors to get loans going forward. But I would argue that these do not have to be mutually exclusive goals. We can create a healthier project environment where all of the above goals are achieved simultaneously. Unfortunately, all too often we don't trust each other, and we build contractual walls between us that prevent collaboration. Going forward, we need to break down these barriers and create a business ecosystem that promotes alignment and harmony between owners and the entire supply chain. This is imperative if we are to survive on the back end of this economic crisis. This diagram shows the breakdown of the approximate 40% waste in most capital projects. And when we think of project waste, our minds typically go immediately to field inefficiencies. For instance, materials waiting on people or people waiting on materials. This is the orange slice at approximately 10 o'clock called non-value-added field operations. This is the focus of most of our improvement efforts in the industry to date. And there is still huge opportunity to make improvement here. I believe that some types of field waste, though, may actually worsen as we come out of this crisis, as for instance, obtaining bulk materials out of China or maybe scaffolding materials or whatever might be more difficult going forward. But now let's talk about the rest of the chart. These other sources of waste are mostly financial in nature. They're truly insidious and actually much larger in the aggregate. Going forward, we really have to focus on improving in these areas. So why so much waste? Well, let's start with what I like to call the trust tax. This effective tax, air quotes tax, weighs heavily on the industry. Most of the elements in this chart are a result of the fact that, generally speaking, nobody trusts anyone else in our industry. I heard a clever saying a few years ago, we come together on projects as strangers and leave as enemies. How true. Why can't we act more as neighbors, where we share a common cause and a long-term outlook toward mutual success? I would challenge us to think more along those lines. We've already also touched on the fact that the hierarchical nature of our supply chain, where it's essentially a pyramid with the owner at the top, results in layer upon layer of protectionist dollars and compounding markups. Over time, I think we'll see a flattening of the supply chain where suppliers can engage with their innovations and good ideas much earlier in the project lifecycle and not be relegated to 3 bids and a buy, or I like to say 3 bids and a cloud of dust, treated as a commodity much too late in the procurement process. And when we look at the typical request for proposal and bidding process, we often get so singularly focused on initial cost that we tend to lose sight of the entire value equation. You know, initial cost is only one variable in a multivariable value equation. I believe we need to find smarter ways to select all products and services on projects. Can we find smarter ways to choose partners based on who can maximize the return on investment contribution of every product and service on the project? If so, I think that would be incredibly powerful. Also, I believe we need to make selection decisions much faster. The average RFP to PO process for industrial construction averages 9 months. That's a lot of lost revenue generating production time for the owner when you add up all the time across all the procurement cycles on the typical project. We also have challenges with everyone on the project running different systems, whether it's different ERPs, 3D modeling platforms, or field AWP systems or whatever, different technologies. Most of these systems don't talk well to each other, largely due to our industry's closed API culture, software business models that tend to restrict open sharing across system boundaries, and generally a widely held belief that almost all data is proprietary. You know, the truth is, again, my opinion, that probably less than 5% of all data that exists on any project is proprietary, yet it seems like we act as if that number is closer to 95%. And as projects become larger and more fragmented and with more global players involved, all of these challenges become exacerbated. And finally, as I alluded to earlier, our contracts tend to be exceedingly onerous. We're so suspicious as to the malintent of our contract counterparts, and we very carefully protect our own position, and then we exhaustively paper around it, conceiving of every possible way that the other party is going to try and take advantage of us. Quite honestly, continuing like this is a race to the bottom. So when we emerge from this crisis, and hopefully that is soon, it will be more important than ever that we apply a disciplined approach to project planning and execution. Bob mentioned earlier, we need to shore up our blocking and tackling, and we really need to focus on efficiency. This can start with implementing leading industry practices such as front-end planning, modularization, and offsite fabrication. I've listed a few of them here. Advanced work packaging is a key one. CII has published 17 industry best practices, and I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with them and implement them if you've not already done so, especially ones that have a direct impact on health and safety, like zero accident techniques, or ZAT is the acronym on the slide here. And I'll go back to an earlier point I made about the importance of collaboration. Seek trusting relationships with proven supply chain partners, and form contracts that encourage value-based delivery while discouraging traditional zero-sum gaming, where for one party to win, the other must lose. We really need to take seriously the goal of achieving a shared success model with win-win outcomes for all parties to the contract. Consider using novel approaches such as shared risk reward contracting models under a lean, integrated project delivery, or IPD type of arrangement. IPD has been around for over 20 years. Many of you may have even worked in an IPD project before, but until recently, its use has been limited to only a few sectors of the construction industry, like healthcare and commercial building. Fortunately, it started making its way into the industrial construction space a few years ago, but it's still rarely used. CII completed a recent study called I2PD, or Industrial Integrated Project Delivery, so I'd encourage you to look at that as well. Finally, because the need for capital efficiency will be so great coming out of this crisis, it's more important than ever that we leverage digital technology to drive waste out of our work processes and improve the flow of data across company boundaries. So speaking of digital technology, I'm going to leave you now with a look into the future, or actually this is the near future, because game-changing technologies such as smart contracts and blockchain already exist and are being implemented in industries very similar to construction. For example, the upstream oil and gas industry has already been using these technologies for a few years, and they're reporting cost savings anywhere from 5 to 30%, depending on the use case. And on capital projects, I see a beautiful marriage of reality capture tools like 3D models and AWP software platforms with smart contracts and blockchain. And that's depicted on this chart here that's animating. This can drive significant waste out of the project process and deliver immediate value today, which is one reason I really like it. It can be done right now. Some benefits of these technologies include rapidly increasing the velocity of cash flow throughout the project. Smart contracts, which essentially are just digital versions of regular contracts, but a bit smarter, can take us from an average of 74-day payment terms down to literally 1 or 2 day payment terms. Faster payments likely will result in invoice discounts for the owner, along with having less contract leakage and human error in project reporting and invoicing. Smart contracts also greatly reduce back office costs and overheads, slashing accounting and finance and audit resources by literally an order of magnitude. As shown in this diagram, all project data can now be captured in highly secure information blocks that provide full transparency of all project data to all project participants simultaneously, assuming, of course, they have the information to see, or the permission, to see that information. The successive accumulation or chain of data blocks is what we refer to as blockchain. With blockchain, we can finally achieve a shared single source of truth for all project data, not just the engineering information contained in the 3D model. And if you apply blockchain deep enough into the supply chain, the owner can have a complete provenance and traceability of materials and services when they go to commission and start up their facility. This is an enabling technology for full digital twin to ultimately be achieved. These new technologies will force a shift from paper-based thinking to digital thinking. It's no secret that our tech industry has long been a laggard when it comes to adopting new technology. Most of our current work processes and the technologies that are trying to streamline them today are based on old paper-based thinking. In fact, most of those technology point solutions are simply automating inefficient manual processes rather than inventing completely new approaches based on digital thinking, like automating the invoicing process, for instance, with smart contracts. These new digital technologies also will provide the foundation, or I'll say data lake, that will enable other improvements in the future. For example, we envision much more sophisticated methods for analyzing project risk in a dynamic manner, and perhaps that will be enabled by the development of an equivalent, like a FICO score or Uber rating type of system for all companies across the industry. Now, this concept goes way beyond today's typical pre-qualification process, which just looks at things like your safety record and your bonding capacity, and you have your insurance in place and so on. And for these types of powerful capabilities to come to fruition, we're going to need a rich data environment upon which they can be built. Blockchain will provide that for us. These ideas and others are currently being explored in a major research and development effort that is being co-led by Kurt and CII, housed at the University of Texas at Austin, and it's called Operating System 2.0, or OS2 for short. Some of you may have heard of it. It's a multi-year journey, and I encourage you to look into it if you're interested in these types of transformative ideas. I happen to be a member of the OS2 leadership team, and I'm really excited about the revolutionary advancements being developed by CI Kurt and a core group of like-minded industry-leading organizations. In closing, as the proverbial phoenix rose from the ashes, so will our industry triumph over this crisis. Whether you're reactivating your job sites or trying to achieve excellence in the planning or execution of future projects, strong leadership and a focus on capital efficiency will be critical for our success going forward. I believe we can emerge from this crisis even stronger, especially if we focus on collaboration and rapid adoption of new methods and technologies. Now is an opportune time to make these changes. Stephen Covey taught us that we need to sharpen our saws every so often. I believe there's never been a better time to sharpen your saw than now. It might actually even be a matter of survival. If you're interested in learning more about any of these topics we've covered here today, please feel free to reach out to us. The Premium Resources Group has many hundreds of years of collective experience that can add value to your organization. We're here to help. And with that, I will now open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Scott and Bob and Pete, for that informative presentation. Now we come to one of the most fun parts of this webinar, and that is the Q&A. So some of them are coming in via text, some of them are on the chat box, so let's get right to it. So Rick Bellato asked, how do you motivate or restart the people when they're so discouraged, distracted, and impacted by the personal impact of COVID. Now, Scott, maybe you had that same situation at the Pringles plant when the tornado ripped right through it and you were up and running in a couple of days. But the question is open-ended to either of you three: motivating and restarting projects with people challenges.
I think it came, this is Scott. At Pringles in Jackson, Tennessee, a tornado devastated the plant and the area. They also had hurricanes in the New Orleans site, Katrina, which took out pretty much the city. And the first goal was not one communication, but it's like, so how are our people? What are they doing? What are they feeling? So it was a mass effort by everyone to kind of like contact everybody. How are they doing? What are their concerns when they came back? And a lot of things had to change as far as like shifts people were working, shifts construction could work, but it was not like one shoe fits all. It was pretty much people matter. Let's contact them. Let's see that our plan works so that they're taken care of, because it's also getting the business back online, but also the people had to take care of a lot of efforts when their houses were destroyed.
Any of the others have any comments? Bob?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things. I totally agree with Scott. You know, in the construction space, our HSE plans have been 95% S, safety. And that world's going to change. I think it's changed where there's going to be a real heavy emphasis, or there needs to be a really heavy emphasis on the H with the health. And of course, environment's always there. The second thing I'd like to add, besides what we've already talked about planning and getting your best protocols and plans together, is it'll give the workers a lot of confidence if management is very visible on a day-to-day basis out in the field. Not just your construction leadership, or but get, you know, the owner, be out there with the gang. Management from the construction companies and the engineers, get out there and just show them you care and show them that it's okay to be out there, as long as they're following proper protocol.
Great. Let me go on to another question. By the way, Rick Bellato, there was a response from a couple of folks in the group, the Zoom group chat, so I'll invite your invitation to that. Also, I'll invite your invitation to an announcement that Greg Palmer posted while the presentation was ongoing, and that is Kurt has developed a special report, Construction and Crisis Special Report, goes out weekly, and it contains other resources that we are gleaning from owners and from contractors and from other areas that you may or may not know about. So if you'd like to subscribe to that, Greg Palmer has put a note in the chat box describing how you can get a hold of that. There's another question that has come in via text, and it is, with so much uncertainty currently and things changing on a daily basis, how is it really possible to prepare for project reactivation? Is this the right time, or do we need more information? Thoughts?
I think I'm just, go ahead, Bob.
No, Scott, go ahead.
Bob made a comment, there's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's the one given on all this. So the question is, you can wait and wait and wait, but if you're 80% right now, you're way ahead of time, you're way ahead of schedule by using this time now and then working on the 20% later. So I think you got to take your best guess and sometimes, and move forward on that. If you're waiting for 100% solution, you're going to lose a lot of time and energy and have a bad plan at the end.
Thank you, Scott. Bob, you want to weigh in?
No, I think Scott nailed it. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that can be done now before you are allowed back on site. And some of these states are starting to talk about turning things back on slowly. I know Pennsylvania starts back up around May 8th. So like Scott said, don't wait and wait and wait. From a leadership perspective, what projects do we have? Get together with the owners, whether it's Zoom meetings or however you have to do it, and the engineers, and make sure that you're ready well in advance so you can hit the ground. That'll help the worker morale question as well.
And I think it's like, now's a good time to reach out to them when you have time. And it's just going back down to, how do I communicate? What's the feeling now? What are their concerns? And then how best can you you deal with it.
Thanks, Scott. The next question asks, so do smart contracts fit right into my plan review and bidding software like Bluebeam and others? Smart contracting.
Yeah, that's probably for me. So the way smart contracts are being used today, and there is opportunity to expand this use case because they're really just creeping into our industry now, is they're essentially just being used to automate the current commercial terms of the current paper contracts. So what I mean by that is you have a current contract today between, say, owner and engineer, or engineer and fabricator, or contractor, subcontractor, whatever the case may be. And that contract has commercial terms that contemplate whatever the goods and services are being provided for whatever the agreed to remuneration is. So what you essentially do with a smart contract is you sit down with a programmer and a business analyst, and you code that logic into a computer program. And that logic, that computer program then runs and executes on the project. And what triggers it to work are the data capture events of that completed work. So let's say, for instance, that contract between contractor and subcontractor says the subcontractor gets paid for work that they install at site. Well, that work's probably captured through, some kind of quality checklist where the quality inspector says, yep, I've inspected the work, it's completed. Or maybe there's an AWP software that says, yeah, the IWP, the installation work package now has been completed. Whatever the data capture events are, it could be timesheets, maybe they're getting paid by the hour. But that can be digitally fed into the smart contract because all of that is just data. And as long as it follows a common data schema, and by the way, smart contracts will help drive common data schemas and standardization across our industry. It's something I didn't even mention, but that's another need. Then basically the smart contract executes, records the information on the blockchain if you so desire. That's certainly the recommended approach. And then the bank accounts tied to the smart contract. So whenever that payable event occurs, the bank it can just be an electronic funds transfer from one account to the next. And the only thing this requires is both parties to agree up front as to what the payable events are, which they've done anyway because they negotiated a contract, and then what the data capture and recognition of those payable events will be. So it will be this system, we're capturing this kind of information as certified or validated by the QC guy or whatever the case may be. So that's essentially how they're being used today. So the question about the bidding process and estimating, I guess precedes that, because that is actually work being done leading up to the negotiation of the contract. So hopefully that answers the question. Happy to embellish or maybe talk more about that, but for now I get to go on to some other questions. And by the way, I put my phone number in the chat. If anyone wants to call or reach out or have deeper discussions on this, happy to do that.
Greg, this is Scott. Just one comment on contracts. In my working with project managers, I would be called up and they say, well, we're just about ready to sign this contract and we have a few questions for you. It's like, well, can you send me the contract? They would say, no, I haven't read it. It's like, well, the first thing you ought to do is read your contract, because there's so many assumptions that people make, whether it be smart or dumb, that you just need to, understand. And this is a good thing to do now. It's like, read your contract. What does it really say? Because you may be now in a position where it has to change. So grounding yourself in the contract is, I think, a key project thing that project managers or construction managers all should do.
I'll also add this, that the smart contract can be applied even to a multi-party contract, right? An IPD type contract, that's an ideal situation. And hopefully going forward too, and the work with OS2 is also looking at creating smarter smart contracts, meaning contracts that are much less onerous and much more kind of grounded in a philosophy of collaboration and working together. And when you use this type of technology, it also can really drive down your overheads. Like you really get to an environment where you literally don't have any invoices anymore, because the work itself is automatically recognized and the payable event occurs. You don't have to have the poor subcontractor at the end of the month walking into the job trailer with a stack of paper a foot high of all their three-way matching and their packing slips and all of the human error inside of that pile of paper. And then the poor person and the general contractor pouring through it and finding those errors and kicking it back for another recycle. I mean, this is what results in the 74-day payment terms or whatever. I mean, some projects are over 100 days. It's just ridiculous. So automating that makes a bunch of sense. And you also take a bunch of the back office overhead people out of the process as well. You don't need nearly as many project accountants, auditors, finance people. So a lot of the savings being reported in that upstream oil and gas is just back office savings. You just need a lot fewer people. So this is stuff that can be done today too, as I said. So I'd really encourage people to start looking at it.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. So one of the questions asks, what do you think is the most difficult part of ramp up and launch post-pandemic? What are the real watch-outs? And the second part of the question, do you anticipate any regulatory compliance issues emerging that are brand new to all of us? Thoughts from any of you? I know you've had issues crises you've dealt with on your projects in the past, the various organizations. What's the most difficult? What's the watch out? What do we need to be most mindful of?
I'll take a shot at it first. I think we touched on it before. Someone asked a question about worker morale, and dealing with that, I think that is going to be a huge challenge. So just put yourself in a pipe fitter's shoes, and you got a family at home, and you're hearing all these stories about healthcare workers going to work and they don't want to bring it to their home and their families. So those morale questions and keeping your eyes and mind on your safety while you're working, let alone productivity, I think is going to be a huge challenge. And that's why just another reason we need to care for our people and work in a collaborative spirit. Because when they see us all out there with them, I think it's going to be a huge boost. Not to mention the efficiency of daily pre-access testing and all the new protocols that we're under. I have a friend of mine that has an ongoing construction site that has not stopped, and the social or the worker distancing, the daily access, temperatures being taken on the way in at lunchtime and on the way out of work, the masks, of course, and the distancing, all those kind of things. I think inherently, if it was me, it would build in fear initially. So we're creating a new culture now, and I think that's going to be a huge challenge to get by.
I think that's a good point, Scott. The one I would work out is just making sure that as you look at the site, and if you have like ongoing operations, construction sites, projects going on, it's like the coordination of where are all the people. Because some of the times we've had to basically say that manufacturing has to continue because we need to get the business back on, and then construction isn't left with the normal schedules, and it becomes how do you use the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then who's working where in what areas? And you may just have to kind of like cordon off areas because construction may not be able to be in that area, or manufacturing may not be able to be in that area, just because you have to limit access.
Thanks, Scott. Another question asks, are there additional resources that'll need to be brought into the ramp up and launch team that may not have been required before? Somebody mentioned, the health of our workers, and I'll remind you that in a subsequent issue of The Voice magazine, we're going to highlight the problem of construction being, I think, one of the most, if not the most, industry afflicted by suicide. And this was made vividly obvious to us at our national conference. We've got resources we're developing on this. Safety committees picking it up. So the question is, from one listener, what additional resources might we need to bring in to assure that we have the kind of mindset and attitude that success requires? Thoughts?
I think you hit it, Greg, about the HS&E, but it's like making them part of the project team versus not, hey, come in and look at the site for a day and then go away. It's how do they come in? They're reviewing schedules. They're looking, at this, that, and the other. And it's what does this need to do? So it's just a different set of eyes looking at, like project schedules or just the whole what's going on at the site.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, the medical professionals, I think in all areas we're going to need a good emphasis on leveraging subject matter experts, and whether it's medical or safety or, just inspecting all that equipment that we talked about to make sure it's safe and will be maintained to be safe. So I think each individual project needs to assess that, and while you're developing your new protocols around health and safety, you need to assess your staffing plan and what kind of experts you do need. It's a darn good question. I don't think one shoe fits all sizes.
I think the other thing to deal with is just what is your schedule and is it realistic? We used to, on one of the startups I was on, they would have a weekend staffing review of construction. And the only question I would ask is the Dallas Cowboys playing? And if the answer was yes, I knew that the construction schedule was way overinflated as far as the number of workers showing up. So it's just kind of like I'd be looking at my schedule as kind of like a upside, downside based on how many people are showing up.
Thanks, guys. We've got less than 2 minutes, probably less than a minute left. The other question coming in is, what resources or websites are you folks monitoring frequently to stay up to date with new developments? Now, obviously, we've got the Construction and Crisis Special Report that Kurt is offering. We also have updates on the Kurt website. We have these webinars. What outside resources are you folks monitoring to stay well informed?
I'll share ones that I look at regularly. First of all, I subscribe to Engineering News Record and get daily email updates from ENR. They're always topical. Construction Dive I find is excellent. They have a number of always relevant current articles. And then I follow the different organizations' sites, CURT, CII, the blogs that are coming out. There's a bunch of webinars. I even look at some in the insurance industry. Look at some, from NCCER and ABC more on the labor side. So I follow groups like that, and then I just try to triangulate the information, and then just talk to lots of people. I'm on the phone much of the day, every day, just talking to industry contacts and just kind of seeing what's happening out there. So that's what I do. Thanks,
Pete. Other two care to weigh in on resources or websites that you're monitoring very closely to stay up to date?
I think the one is just networking with others. What are they seeing? There are websites out there, but I think you get more enrichment by talking to people because it becomes a more expansive. The one I use a lot for just like what's happening in the world is BBC website, because it pretty much consolidates a lot of stuff about what's happening globally.
Thank you, Scott. Bob, any thoughts on your resources?
The only thing I have to add, I spent a long time in Canada during my heyday, and CBC, I think, is pretty globally as well, but nothing else to add to these gentlemen.
Great, thanks. And I want to also add that another key another key resource, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, is the Construction Users Roundtable, as Kurt. This is an opportunity to use your membership to connect with folks that you need to connect with, especially owner-to-owner interface. So if you have a question or you think we can help you in connecting with folks, not only is theprgteam.com a resource, but so is your membership in the Construction Users Roundtable. And I would invite you to reach out to Rob or Rana. Both of their contact information sets can be found on our website. I'll also ask Greg Palmer to put them in the Zoom chat here before we leave, so it's a part of this record. Also, I would invite you to go back and look at the other 9 recordings. This is the 10th webinar, Construction and Crisis webinar. The recordings of past webinars, they're terrific, and they are available to you as a CURT member, and then you're free to send them out to anyone that you feel might need these. We are out of time. And again, I want to thank Pete and Bob and Scott for their insightful wisdom and experience. We appreciate that so much. Also be advised that by the end of the day, again, you'll receive the bios of these fellows. You'll receive contact information for each of them. You'll receive this entire slide deck. And for CURT members, you'll receive a recording that you can then distribute throughout your organization, as well as other informative resources. So as we leave, I want to encourage you to take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thanks for joining us today.